Nobody noticed the future ruler of 3 empires crying in the rain. The storm arrived without warning. One moment the sky above Kelio's frontier station glowed with the soft violet colors of dusk. The next, dark clouds rolled across the horizon like an ocean swallowing the stars. Warning sirens echoed through the settlement. Cargo workers hurried toward shelter. Market vendors sealed their stalls. Transport pilots rushed to secure their vessels before the energy squall reached the valley. Within minutes, sheets of glowing rain swept across the station. Ethan Walker pulled the collar of his weather jacket higher and continued toward the maintenance depot. Storms were common on frontier worlds. Most people learned not to fight them. They simply found cover and waited. He was halfway across the main transit plaza when something unusual caught his attention. At first he thought it was abandoned luggage. A small figure sat alone beside a dark observation monument near the edge of the square. The rain hammered the stone around her. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked twice. Everyone was focused on reaching safety before the storm intensified. Ethan slowed. The figure did not move. Another flash of distant lightning illuminated the plaza. That was when he realized it was a woman. She sat with her head lowered. Long silver hair hung wet against her shoulders. Her hands trembled slightly. Even through the rain, Ethan could see something else. She was crying. He stood still for a moment. The wind howled through the plaza. Water raced across the pavement. Hundreds of people passed nearby without noticing. Or perhaps they noticed and chose not to get involved. Frontier worlds taught hard lessons. Most strangers kept their distance. Ethan sighed quietly, then changed direction. The woman never looked up as he approached. She seemed lost inside whatever thoughts had brought her there. Ethan stopped several feet away. "Ma'am." No response. The storm roared overhead. "Ma'am, you should get inside." The woman finally lifted her head. Golden eyes met his. They were striking, not because of their color, because of the exhaustion behind them. Ethan had seen that look before. People carried it after loss, after disappointment, after too many sleepless nights. "I am fine," she said softly. Her voice barely carried above the rain. Ethan glanced toward the shelter entrance across the plaza. "You do not look fine." The woman almost smiled. "Almost. That is unfortunate." Ethan nodded toward the station buildings. "There is a public shelter 200 feet from here." "I know." "Then why are you sitting in the middle of a storm?" She looked away. "Because it is quiet." Another burst of rain swept across the square. Ethan stared at her for a second. Then he removed the thermal blanket rolled inside his utility pack. "Here." The woman blinked. "What? Take it." "You do not even know me." Ethan shrugged. "You looked cold." She stared at the blanket without moving. The reaction puzzled him. It was only a blanket. Nothing valuable. Yet she looked at it as if nobody had ever offered her one before. Finally she accepted it. Her fingers closed around the fabric carefully. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome." For several seconds neither spoke. Around them the storm continued to pound the station. Neon lights flickered through the rain. Transport beacons flashed red against the dark sky. The woman pulled the blanket around her shoulders. Some color returned to her face. Ethan started to leave. Then something stopped him. He looked back. She was staring into the distance again. Alone. Surrounded by hundreds of people and somehow completely alone. "You eaten today?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. "What?" "Food. Have you eaten?" A brief silence followed. Then she shook her head. Ethan nodded once. "Come on." "Where?" "There is a diner still open near the maintenance district." The woman looked genuinely confused. "Why?" Ethan adjusted his jacket against the rain. "Because nobody should sit in a storm hungry." The golden eyes widened slightly. For the first time, the sadness in them shifted. Not disappearing, just making room for something else. Something she clearly had not expected to find on this forgotten frontier world. Kindness. The diner sat at the far end of the maintenance district, tucked between a repair warehouse and an aging cargo terminal. Most visitors overlooked it. The sign above the entrance flickered through the rain, casting warm amber light across the wet pavement. Ethan pushed open the door and stepped inside. A wave of heat immediately replaced the cold wind outside. The smell of fresh coffee, baked bread, and grilled vegetables filled the room. For a moment the woman remained near the entrance. Her silver hair was still damp from the storm. Water glistened across the dark fabric of her clothing. She looked around cautiously, as though she had entered a place completely unfamiliar. Ethan chose a booth near the window. "Come on," he said. "The food is better than it looks." The woman hesitated before joining him. Outside, rain continued to sweep across the station. Inside, soft music played from old ceiling speakers. Several mechanics sat near the counter discussing engine repairs. A family occupied a corner table. Nobody paid much attention to the newcomer. Ethan noticed her watching them. Not suspiciously, more like someone studying a scene she rarely witnessed. A server arrived carrying 2 menus. "Evening, Ethan." "Evening, Carla." The server smiled warmly. "Usual?" "Probably." She glanced toward the woman. "And for your friend?" The woman looked surprised by the question. "I do not know." Carla laughed softly. "Then we will figure it out." After the server left, silence settled between them. Ethan opened his menu. The woman stared at hers for several seconds before setting it down. "You come here often?" she asked. "A few times a week." "Why?" Ethan looked around the diner. "Good food. Friendly people. Fair prices." She blinked. "That is all." "That seems like enough." The woman lowered her eyes. For some reason, the answer appeared to affect her more than he intended. A few minutes later, their meals arrived. Ethan ordered a simple frontier stew with bread. The woman selected a vegetable dish after Carla patiently explained half the menu. When the food appeared, she stared at it. "Something wrong?" Ethan asked. "No." "Then why are you looking at it like that?" She seemed almost embarrassed. "Nobody has served me food in a very long time." Ethan frowned. "You mean cooked food?" "I mean food made by someone who wanted me to enjoy it." The statement lingered in the air. Ethan did not know what to say. Instead, he picked up his spoon and began eating. A moment later, she copied him. For the first time since he met her, some of the tension left her shoulders. The warmth of the diner slowly replaced the exhaustion in her eyes. Outside, the storm continued. Inside, time seemed to move more slowly. Eventually, the woman looked toward the window. Rain streaked across the glass while station lights reflected through the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "Why did you stop?" Ethan looked confused. "Stop where?" "In the plaza." She studied him carefully. "Hundreds of people walked past me." Ethan considered the question. "You look like you needed help." "That is not an answer." "It is the only answer I have." The woman stared at him, golden eyes searching for something more complicated, something deeper, something worthy of analysis. Ethan simply shrugged. "If somebody is hurting and you can help, you help." The simplicity of the statement seemed to catch her completely off guard. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked down at the warm meal in front of her. Outside, thunder rolled across the frontier sky. Inside, for the first time that day, a faint, genuine smile touched her face. It was small, fragile, easy to miss, but Ethan noticed it. And somewhere deep inside her, a question had begun to form. Not about the storm, not about the station, not even about herself. It was a question about humans. Because nobody had ever treated her like this before, and she was beginning to wonder why. The storm had weakened by the time they left the diner. Rain still fell, but the violent winds were gone. The streets of Helios Frontier Station glowed beneath rows of blue transit lights. Water reflected neon signs across the pavement like liquid glass. Ethan stepped outside and pulled his jacket tighter against the cold night air. The woman followed a few seconds later. For the first time since he met her, she seemed calmer. Not happy, just less overwhelmed. They walked in silence for a while. The station had grown quieter. Most businesses had already closed for the night. Cargo cranes moved slowly in the distance, their warning lights blinking against the dark horizon. Somewhere beyond the mountains, thunder rolled through the clouds. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Ethan asked. The woman hesitated. "I did." Ethan glanced toward her. "That does not sound very reassuring." She looked away. "Plans changed." "Badly." A faint smile appeared. "You could say that." Ethan nodded. He did not press further. Everyone carried burdens. Frontier life taught people to respect silence when it was offered. They continued walking beneath the station lights. Then Ethan noticed something strange. The woman had begun slowing down. At first he thought she was simply tired. But after another 100 feet, her steps became noticeably unsteady. She placed a hand against a nearby support column and stopped completely. Ethan frowned. "You all right?" "I am fine." "That answer is becoming suspicious." The woman attempted another step. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. Ethan reached out automatically and steadied her before she could fall. Her skin felt cold, much colder than it should have. "You are not fine." She closed her eyes briefly. I am simply tired. How long since you slept? No answer. Ethan stared. Seriously? The woman looked almost embarrassed. A little while. A little while means what? Another silence. Finally she answered. 38 hours. Ethan blinked. 38 hours? She nodded weakly. That explains a lot. The woman tried to stand straight again, but exhaustion was finally catching up with her. Whatever had brought her to that lonely monument in the middle of a storm had clearly taken more from her than she wanted to admit. Ethan looked down the street. The maintenance district hostel was still nearly half a mile away. Normally that walk would be easy. Tonight it might as well have been 10 miles. Okay, he said. New plan. The woman looked confused. What plan? Ethan crouched slightly in front of her. Get on. She stared at him. What? Get on. What are you doing? Saving us 30 minutes. Her golden eyes widened. You cannot be serious. Ethan laughed. I am absolutely serious. You intend to carry me? You can barely stand. That is ridiculous. Probably. He glanced back over his shoulder. Still getting on? The woman looked genuinely shocked. For a moment, she simply stood there while rain drifted softly around them. Ethan waited patiently. Eventually she spoke. Nobody has ever carried me before. There is a first time for everything. The answer left her speechless. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she accepted. Ethan lifted her carefully onto his back and stood. She was lighter than he expected. The thermal blanket shifted around her shoulders as he adjusted his grip. Then they started walking. The station lights stretched ahead through the mist. For several minutes neither spoke. The only sounds were distant machinery and the gentle rhythm of rain against metal rooftops. Finally the woman whispered something so quietly Ethan almost missed it. Thank you. Ethan smiled. You already said that. Another pause followed. Then she rested her head against the blanket and looked toward the glowing lights of the frontier station. Somewhere deep inside her, walls built over many years had begun to crack. Because for the second time in one evening, a human had done something she could not understand. He had helped her without asking who she was. And somehow that felt more extraordinary than anything power had ever given her. The hostel sat on the edge of the maintenance district overlooking a canyon of dark cliffs and distant industrial lights. It was not luxurious. The building was old. The walls carried decades of weather stains from countless storms. But it was clean, warm, and safe. For Ethan, that was enough. By the time they arrived, the rain had faded into a gentle mist. The woman was still resting quietly against his back. Not asleep, just exhausted beyond words. Ethan pushed through the front entrance and stepped into the lobby. A fireplace glowed softly near the far wall. The scent of cedar wood drifted through the air. The night clerk looked up from behind the desk and immediately raised an eyebrow. Long day. Ethan laughed. Something like that. The clerk glanced toward the silver-haired woman. Friend of yours? Before Ethan could answer, the woman spoke softly. I am beginning to think so. The response surprised both men. A faint smile crossed the clerk's face. A few minutes later they settled into a small private room overlooking the canyon. Outside the window, clouds drifted across the mountains beneath pale moonlight. The storm had finally passed. Silence filled the room. Comfortable silence. The kind that arrives when nobody feels pressure to speak. Ethan placed a cup of hot tea on the table beside her. You should drink something. She accepted it carefully. Warm steam curled upward between them. You keep helping me, she said quietly. That seems to bother you. It confuses me. Ethan sat in a nearby chair. Why? The woman looked down into the tea. Golden reflections shimmered across the surface. Because nobody does things without a reason. Ethan leaned back. That is not true. In my experience, it is. Her answer carried a weight that had nothing to do with the storm. Ethan noticed it immediately. This was not really a conversation about food or blankets or shelter. It was something older, something deeper. He waited. Eventually, she continued. Most people want something. Her voice remained calm. Influence, access, favor, recognition. She stared out the window. Some simply want to be close to power. Ethan remained silent. The woman smiled sadly. The strange thing is that they usually stop seeing you after a while. Seeing you, they only see what you represent. For several seconds the room grew still. The fire crackled softly downstairs. Wind brushed against the glass outside. Ethan watched her expression. It was not arrogance, not self-pity. It looked like loneliness, genuine loneliness. That sounds exhausting, he said. The woman laughed softly. A real laugh this time. Small but genuine. That may be the most honest response I have heard in years. Ethan shrugged. I try. Another silence followed. Then something changed. The wall she had spent all evening maintaining finally began to lower. Not completely. Just enough. Have you ever felt trapped? She asked. Ethan thought for a moment. A few times. What did you do? Kept moving. That's simple. Usually. The woman stared into the distance. I spent my entire life preparing for responsibilities I never chose. Ethan listened. Everyone told me how fortunate I was. Her fingers tightened slightly around the teacup. Everyone told me what my future would become. She looked toward the dark horizon beyond the window. Nobody ever asked whether I wanted it. Ethan did not interrupt. He simply listened. Sometimes people needed solutions. Sometimes they only needed someone willing to hear them. Minutes passed. The room remained quiet except for the wind outside. Finally, she turned toward him. Her eyes no longer carried tears. Just honesty. I do not even know why I am telling you this. Ethan smiled gently. Because I am probably never going to judge you for it. The woman stared at him. Then slowly, for the first time since they met beside that monument in the rain, she smiled without sadness. It transformed her entire face. And somewhere beyond the mountains, hidden beneath clouds and stars, dozens of distant ships continued searching for a missing woman who carried the future of 3 empires on her shoulders. Yet inside the small frontier hostel, she was simply a tired traveler talking to the first person who had treated her like one. Morning arrived slowly over Kelio's frontier station. Sunlight spilled across the canyon beyond the hostel, painting the cliffs in shades of gold and copper. The storm was gone. In its place came clear skies and cool mountain air drifting through the settlement. Ethan woke early as usual. Years of maintenance work had trained his internal clock better than any alarm system. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the lobby and stepped outside onto the observation deck. Below him, freight shuttles moved between landing platforms. Cargo cranes awakened one by one. The station was returning to life. He expected the woman to remain asleep for several more hours. 38 hours without rest would leave anyone exhausted. Instead, when he returned upstairs, he found her already awake. She stood near the window watching the sunrise over the canyon. Silver hair reflected the morning light. The blanket still rested around her shoulders. For a few seconds, Ethan remained quiet. Something about the scene felt peaceful. The woman glanced toward him and offered a small smile. Good morning. Good morning. Ethan handed her the second cup he had brought upstairs. Tea. Her eyes widened slightly. You remembered. You do not seem like a coffee person. The smile returned. This time it stayed longer. They spent the morning walking through the station. Ethan had the day off, and the woman admitted she was not ready to leave yet. Neither explained why. Somehow no explanation felt necessary. They visited the open-air market district. Vendors sold handcrafted tools, imported fruits, mechanical parts, and artwork from distant worlds. Children ran between the stalls chasing small floating toys. Music drifted from a nearby street performer. For the first time since he met her, Ethan saw genuine curiosity replacing sadness. She stopped to examine everything. A carved sculpture, a basket of glowing fruit, a display of handmade jewelry. Ordinary things, simple things, yet she studied them as though they were treasures. Eventually, they sat beside a fountain near the center of the marketplace. Water sparkled beneath the sunlight. People moved around them without recognizing her, without bowing, without staring, without expecting anything. The woman seemed fascinated by that fact. Nobody knows who I am here, she said quietly. Ethan looked around. That bothers you? No, she smiled. I think I like it. Several children rushed past, chasing a small hovering ball. One nearly collided with her. The child stopped immediately. Sorry, ma'am. It is all right. The child grinned and ran off again. The woman watched him disappear into the crowd. Her expression changed. Ethan noticed immediately. What? She shook her head slowly. Nothing. That was definitely something. For a moment she hesitated. Then she spoke. Nobody has spoken to me like that in years. Ethan frowned. Politely. Normally people are careful around me. Her gaze followed the families moving through the plaza. Everything becomes formal. That sounds annoying. She laughed. A genuine laugh this time. Bright and unguarded. Several nearby people turned toward the sound and smiled without knowing why. Ethan realized it was the first time he had heard her laugh properly. The realization surprised him. So did the expression on her face afterward. Relief. As if she had forgotten laughter was supposed to feel effortless. The morning drifted into afternoon. Hours passed. Conversations came easily now. They talked about travel, favorite foods, strange customs from different worlds. Ethan told stories about repairing cargo systems during dust storms. She shared stories from distant planets without ever revealing her identity. Yet even while she spoke, a quiet sadness lingered beneath the surface. Ethan could feel it. Whatever life waited for her beyond Helios Frontier Station was still there. Waiting, watching, and somewhere far beyond the atmosphere, hidden among the stars, entire fleets continued searching for the missing heir of 3 empires. But seated beside a fountain under a clear blue sky, she allowed herself something she had not experienced in a very long time. A normal day, and the human beside her never once asked her to be anything more than herself. The second sunset was even more beautiful than the first. Ethan and the woman stood on a ridge overlooking the western edge of Helios Frontier Station. Below them, the settlement stretched across the valley floor like a sea of lights. Cargo ships moved slowly between landing platforms. Distant mountains glowed orange beneath the fading sunlight. For a while neither spoke. The silence felt natural now, comfortable, the kind shared between people who no longer felt the need to fill every moment with conversation. The woman rested her arms on the observation railing and watched the horizon. "I do not want this day to end," she said quietly. Ethan smiled. "Most good days end too quickly." She looked toward him. "You really believe that?" "Absolutely." "Why?" Ethan shrugged. "Because if they lasted forever, we would stop noticing them." The answer lingered between them. The woman turned back toward the sunset. Somewhere deep inside, she knew time was running out. Every hour she remained on Helios made it more likely that someone would find her. She should have left already. She knew that. Yet the thought of leaving filled her with a sadness she could not explain. For 2 days she had experienced something she had not felt in years. Freedom. Not political freedom. Not personal independence. Something simpler. The freedom to exist without expectations. The freedom to be a person instead of a symbol. Suddenly a distant sound interrupted her thoughts. A low vibration rolled through the air, barely noticeable at first. Ethan heard it too. He glanced upward. That is unusual. The vibration grew stronger. Across the station, people began looking toward the sky. Cargo workers stopped what they were doing. Market vendors stepped outside. Children pointed upward. The woman's expression changed immediately. Ethan noticed it. Her shoulders stiffened. The warmth disappeared from her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. She did not answer. High above the atmosphere, small points of light appeared against the darkening sky. 1 became 3. 3 became 10. Then dozens. The lights descended in perfect formation. Ethan frowned. Military ships? The woman slowly closed her eyes. Yes. The answer sounded almost defeated. The lights grew brighter. Massive silhouettes emerged from the upper atmosphere. Elegant vessels unlike anything normally seen on a frontier world. Their polished hulls reflected the sunset as they descended through the clouds. The entire station fell silent. Ethan had lived on Helios for years. He had never seen ships like these. Nobody had. A nearby cargo pilot whispered something under his breath. A market merchant dropped a crate without noticing. The vessels continued descending. Then more appeared behind them. And more after that. The sky itself seemed to fill with shining metal and light. Ethan stared upward. Who were they looking for? The woman laughed softly. It was not a happy laugh. It carried resignation. "Me." Ethan turned toward her. For a moment he thought she was joking. Then he saw her face. She was completely serious. The first vessel reached the upper atmosphere. Its enormous silhouette blocked part of the sunset. Golden symbols illuminated along its hull. Then another set appeared. Then a third. 3 separate royal crests glowing across the evening sky. Even Ethan recognized them. Every citizen in civilized space knew those symbols. They represented power on a scale most people could barely imagine. Entire worlds answered to those emblems. Entire civilizations. The observation deck had become completely silent. The woman lowered her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. Ethan looked from the ships to her and back again. Questions raced through his mind. Hundreds of them. Yet somehow none felt important enough to ask. Above them, the fleets continued their descent. The valley filled with reflected light. And for the first time since meeting her beside that lonely monument in the rain, Ethan realized he knew almost nothing about the woman standing beside him. The only thing he knew for certain was that whatever truth was about to arrive from the sky was far bigger than either of them had imagined. The first ship touched down on the valley floor just after sunset. Its landing lights washed the station in silver and gold. Thousands of people stood frozen across observation decks, rooftops, and transit platforms. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They simply watched. Ethan stood beside the woman at the railing while the enormous vessel settled onto its landing struts with impossible grace. Then a second ship landed. Then a third. More followed behind them, filling the valley with reflected light. The royal symbols glowing across their hulls illuminated the cliffs for miles. Ethan had seen those emblems in history programs and interstellar news broadcasts. Entire governments answered to them. Entire star systems measured their decisions around them. Yet somehow the woman beside him seemed more nervous than impressed. She lowered her eyes toward the ground. I did not want them to find me here. Ethan looked at her. You were hiding? A faint smile appeared. For 2 days. That might be a record. She laughed softly despite herself. Before either could say more, the main vessel opened. A long illuminated ramp extended toward the landing field. Figures emerged immediately. Not soldiers. Not guards. Advisors. Officials. Diplomats. Dozens of them. Everyone dressed in ceremonial attire. They moved quickly across the field before stopping several yards from the base of the ramp. Then something happened that Ethan would remember for the rest of his life. Every single person lowered themselves into a formal bow. The entire landing field became still. The station became still. Even the wind seemed to pause. Ethan stared. Hundreds of highly placed officials remained bowed toward one person, the woman standing beside him. Around the station, whispers spread through the crowd. Confusion turned into disbelief. Disbelief became shock. The woman closed her eyes briefly. She looked almost sad. I was hoping for one more day, she whispered. Ethan could barely process what he was seeing. Who are you? The question escaped before he could stop it. For a moment she did not answer. The lights from the ships reflected in her golden eyes. The valley below glowed beneath the presence of entire fleets. Finally she turned toward him. Someone who became tired. The answer sounded honest. More honest than any title could have been. Before Ethan could respond, a distinguished older woman approached from the landing field accompanied by several advisors. Even from a distance her authority was obvious. She stopped at the edge of the observation platform and lowered her head respectfully. Your Highness. The words echoed through the silence. Ethan felt the entire station collectively stop breathing. The older woman continued. 3 empires have been searching for you. The silver-haired woman sighed softly. I know. Your councils are concerned. I know. Your people are concerned. Her expression softened. I know. The older woman finally looked toward Ethan. Her gaze settled on the thermal blanket still resting around the woman's shoulders. Then she noticed something else. The mud stains from the canyon trail. The frontier hostile identification band. The simple signs of an ordinary life lived for 48 hours. Understanding appeared immediately. She looked back at the woman. Was he kind to you? For the first time since the fleets arrived, a genuine smile appeared. Warm, bright, completely unguarded. The woman glanced toward Ethan before answering. He treated me like a person. The older advisor lowered her eyes. Around them, dozens of officials quietly exchanged looks. Because somehow that answer seemed to matter more than any diplomatic report they could have delivered. And standing in the middle of it all, Ethan finally understood one thing. The woman he had carried through the rain was far more important than he ever imagined. Yet somehow the only thing she seemed to value was the fact that he never cared about that at all. The valley remained illuminated long after darkness settled over Helios frontier station. Thousands of lights from the royal fleets reflected across the cliffs and landing fields. People filled observation decks and public plazas, watching history unfold before their eyes. Ethan stood near the edge of the platform, still trying to process everything he had learned. The woman he had shared meals with, walked beside, and carried through a storm was not simply important. She was one of the most influential individuals in known space. Yet somehow she looked exactly the same as she had beside that monument in the rain. The same silver hair, the same tired eyes, the same quiet sadness that no title could erase. The older advisor approached her once more carrying a small ceremonial case. Several officials followed behind. Their expressions were respectful, almost reverent. The woman looked at the case and sighed softly. "Do we have to do this now?" A few nearby officials exchanged nervous glances. The advisor offered a patient smile. "Your Highness, the entire galaxy already knows where you are." "That is unfortunate." Ethan could not help laughing. The advisor looked briefly surprised before she laughed as well. For a moment, the formal atmosphere cracked. Then the case was opened. Inside rested 3 elegant insignias crafted from different metals. 1 silver, 1 gold, 1 black crystal. Even Ethan recognized their significance. They represented the 3 ruling dynasties of 3 separate empires. The advisor carefully presented them. By decree of the Imperial Councils, Crown Assembly, and Royal Houses, we formally acknowledge the return of Princess Aerolith Voss, heir to the Varelian Empire, successor to the Solari throne, and designated future sovereign of the Illyrian Dominion. Silence followed. Across the platform, every official lowered their heads once more. Ethan felt the weight of the announcement settle over the station. 3 empires, 3 civilizations, 3 futures resting on one person. Yet the woman did not immediately accept the insignias. Instead, she turned toward the crowd gathered throughout the station. Families, mechanics, vendors, travelers, ordinary people living ordinary lives. The same people who had unknowingly shared a marketplace and a diner with one of the most powerful individuals in existence. "For 2 days," she said softly, "none of these people cared about titles." Her voice carried farther than Ethan expected. The platform became completely silent. "For 2 days I was allowed to be myself." She looked toward the insignias. "That has been worth more to me than any ceremony." The advisor lowered her eyes respectfully. No one argued. No one interrupted. Then Aerolith turned toward Ethan. The movement drew the attention of every official on the platform. Every camera drone hovering nearby. Every person watching from below. Ethan suddenly became very aware of how many people were looking at him. "This human," she said quietly, "did not know who I was." The valley remained silent. "He offered shelter." She smiled softly. "He offered food." Another smile. "He carried me when I could not continue walking." Ethan wished very badly that thousands of people would stop staring at him. Unfortunately, they did not. Aerolith stepped closer. Not because he expected anything. Her golden eyes met his. Because he believed someone needed help. For several seconds, neither moved. The fleets glowed beneath the stars. The wind drifted across the canyon. Finally, the advisor spoke. "Your Highness, the councils are waiting." Aerolith nodded slowly. Duty had arrived. The freedom of the last 2 days was ending. Yet before turning away, she looked at Ethan one last time. There was gratitude in her eyes, but also something deeper. Respect. Because among all the rulers, diplomats, and powerful figures she had known throughout her life, the first person who truly saw her had been a maintenance technician from a forgotten frontier world. And somehow that mattered more than the crowns waiting below. 3 months later, the stars above Helios Frontier Station looked exactly the same. Cargo ships still crossed the valley. Mechanics still argued over repair schedules. Vendors still opened their stalls before sunrise. The station had returned to normal, at least for everyone except Ethan Walker. He had become something of a local legend without wanting to. People occasionally recognized him. Visitors sometimes asked questions. Reporters had attempted interviews more than once. Ethan avoided all of them whenever possible. Life was simpler that way. On most days he returned to work, repaired equipment, drank coffee, and watched freighters come and go. Yet every now and then, usually during quiet evenings, he found himself looking toward the stars and wondering how she was doing. The answer arrived on a clear autumn morning. A message appeared on every public display across the station. Not an emergency alert. Not a government announcement. A formal invitation. Citizens gathered around screens throughout the marketplace. Conversations stopped. Traffic slowed. The message carried the seals of 3 empires. Ethan nearly spilled his coffee when he saw it. The coronation ceremony of Princess Aerolith Voss would be broadcast across known space. Hours later, the entire station gathered to watch. Massive screens were installed throughout public plazas. Families brought chairs. Vendors handed out refreshments. Children climbed onto rooftops for a better view. Even the maintenance crews paused their work. Millions of beings across countless worlds watched the same broadcast. The ceremony took place inside a magnificent hall unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Crystal towers rose hundreds of feet overhead. Rivers of light flowed through the architecture itself. Representatives from thousands of civilizations filled the chamber. Kings, queens, diplomats, admirals, leaders whose decisions shaped entire star systems. And at the center stood Aerolith. She wore ceremonial attire crafted from silver and gold. 3 imperial insignias rested upon her shoulders. Yet despite the grandeur surrounding her, Ethan immediately recognized the same woman who had sat alone in the rain beside a forgotten monument. The ceremony continued for nearly an hour. Speeches were given. Oaths were sworn. Formal declarations echoed throughout the hall. Then came the final address. Aerolith stepped forward toward the central platform. The chamber fell silent. Entire worlds fell silent. Her voice carried across every screen. Today, many people speak about responsibility. She paused. Many speak about leadership. Another pause. Many speak about power. The hall remained perfectly still. Then her expression softened. But 3 months ago, I learned something more important. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He already knew where this was going. Aerolith smiled gently. I met a human on a frontier world. A ripple moved through the audience. He did not know my title. She continued. He did not know my future. The smile remained. He did not know who I was. The hall listened carefully. He saw someone crying in a storm. Silence followed. And he helped. No grand speech. No complicated lesson. Just those words. Aerolith lowered her eyes briefly. The first person who treated me like a person was a human. The chamber remained silent for several seconds. Then thousands stood in respect. Not for a ruler. Not for an empire. For an idea. For a simple act of kindness. Far away on Helios, Ethan sat quietly among friends and neighbors as applause echoed through the broadcast. He looked down at the old thermal blanket folded across his lap. The same one he had given away without thinking. Outside, freighters crossed the morning sky. Inside, the broadcast continued. But Ethan barely noticed. Because for the first time, he understood something she had been trying to tell him from the very beginning. The galaxy saw an heir to 3 empires. He had only seen someone who needed help. And somehow, that had made all the difference.